Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of our Getting Started with Apex series. Trying to mix things up a little bit, put some new recording software. We're going to try this with Camtasia, see if we can record some higher quality videos, and maybe actually be able to talk to you a little bit more than we have in the previous few videos. Hopefully this works. Got my Ohana Spirit shirt on today for today's video. So we are going to talk about expression operators and if statements. Should be looking back, read my slides. So if you are not aware, this is very much kind of done on the fly. And when I decided to make these videos, I really didn't have a script, or I was going to make things in what order. So I was thinking back, I was like, you know what, we need to talk about expressions, if statements, how do we express equality, inequality, things like that. So this is going to be, I think, a pretty short video. I think these are pretty easy concepts to grasp. And we're going to do most of it today in we're going to work in our anonymous Apex console instead of creating classes and methods like we have in the past. All right, so that said, let's get in here and let's start coding. All right, so what a statement is in any programming language is it's something that evaluates to true or false. And I'm going to probably get the exact computer science definition of that wrong. So actually, I encourage you, if you are, to take a minute. I'll open this up and take a minute and go through and look at the Apex Developer's Guide. Read through expressions, expression operators. So here's our definition. An expression is a construct made up of variables, operators, and method invocations that evaluates to a single value. That's a mouthful. So let's go in. We're going to do some simple expressions with some operators, and we'll see what they look like. And hopefully that makes that kind of confusing mouthful of computer science stuff a little more accessible. So up top in my comments here, I've just listed kind of what are the basic equality operators, the things that you're going to probably use every day as a developer. So double equal is your statement of equality. We'll get into that a little bit. Exclamation equal is not equal. You got your greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, and double and is and. Double pipes there is or, and an exclamation mark is something that negates a condition. And we'll show what that is. So first off, I'm just going to create a few variables so we have a few things to compare. So if you remember earlier, we always write, so if we're going to create a variable that holds a string, we have to say string name equals, and I'll just set it equal to my name, Brooks. String, we'll call it name2, and we're going to set it equal to Brooks, but with a lowercase b. And then we're going to do a couple with numbers in them. Integer, call it num1, and we'll set that equal to 5. And okay, just gonna speed this up a little bit. We'll do num2, and we'll make that equal to 2. Num3, we're going to leave that one equal to 5. So we got some variables here to play with, some strings and some integers. So almost any time we're going to evaluate things like this, it's going to go inside an if statement. And so if statements are something called a control flow. We're going to tell our code, if something evaluates to true or to false, then do this. So syntactically, the way that looks is we just type if, and my editor's helping me out a little bit. So if, then parentheses. So our expression is going to go inside those parentheses, the thing we're going to evaluate. And inside our code block is something that will run if that condition inside the if statement evaluates to true. So we're just say first condition. So these are comments, right? If we do the 2 forward slashes, that's a comment. There's just a way to leave a note to yourself or another developer. Goes here. So this will only run if what is inside that if statement evaluates to true. So we're just going to add a debug statement so we can get something to the console real quickly. In first condition. So we just want to say, hey, let's just say num1. Remember we said that was equal to 5. And num3 is also equal to 5. So when that runs, we should get a result from our it should enter into this code block and run this debug statement. I'm going to run that. We'll get our debug only. Close that out. Move that over a little bit. So we are in first condition. So that ran. So I'm going to now, so if we wanted to have, hey, so if the code, if this is not true, if we're not going to evaluate this, then we would say else. So we're going to say if you don't run what's in this block, then run what's in this block. And I like to think of these curly brackets, curly braces here. Those are like fences, keeping your code inside, saying, hey, we're only going to do the things available inside of these curly braces. And we're just going to do another debug statement in the else condition. All right. So let's say if num1 is, how about not equal to? Because we talked about that, right? That's one of our operators. Exclamation equal. So this should be false because number 1 is equal to number 3. And we go down, we look at our debug log over here, and indeed, so now it went down to our second code block here in the else condition because this evaluated to false. Number 1 is equal to number 3, so this did not run. This did not evaluate to true, and it went down and ran this block of code. Now, what if we wanted to compare strings? So if name, and I'm going to do this if name equals name2. All right, and already my editor's telling me I'm screwing up here. It's putting a red line under my code, but I want you to see this error and why this is happening. Sorry. All right, compile failure. Line 12, column 5, right there, line 12. Condition expression must be of type Boolean. So it's saying, hey, you've got a condition here, but the equal sign, remember, that is not how we express equality in Apex. That is how we assign something. So we use the equal sign to say up here, like name is equal to Brooks. But if I want to say, hey, is the value, if we go to the place in memory, right, is the value of the variable name, is that the same thing as the value of the variable of name2? And we hit enter, we run that, and it is, right? So also we're like, Apex is not taking case sensitivity into this, so the uppercase and the lowercase b are not relevant here for this. So that's just how we check equality or inequality with both strings and numbers. We could also do, right, if we want to see if something is less than, greater than, right? So we would say if, about num2, which we already know is equal to the number 2, if that is greater than or equal to num1, that should be false, right? Because num1 is 5. 5 is greater than 2. Run that. And we go down to the else condition. So we skip that block. So that code never ran. It went straight down to here because this did not evaluate to true. So, sorry, I've got my Alexa over here sending me, apparently something probably got dropped off in my driveway and I'm getting Alexa notifications. Okay, so that is real quickly how we do equality, inequality, greater than, less than, strings and variables. The next thing we add in is ands and ors, which let us do more complicated expressions. So let's just say if, let's say, what do we want to do? Well, I'm making this up as I go. If number 1 is equal to, if the variable num is equal to num3, and name 2. All right, so it's saying if this thing on the left is true, num1 is equal to num3, and this thing on the right is true. These conditions both have to be true. If they're not, this is going to evaluate to false. Oh, go down here. So that is what we expected in the first condition because both of these values are true. So let's just say if we said num1 is greater than num3 and num1 is less than num2. So this should evaluate to false. And we see now, yes, we did hit into our else condition because both of these things have to be true for this to evaluate, both the statement on the left and the statement on the right. But if we change this to an or, we put those double pipes in. Now, if either of these statements is true, or if these conditions are true, then this statement is going to evaluate to true. So if num1 is the equivalent of num3, or num1 is less than num2, it's going to evaluate and go into our first condition. First condition. So that worked exactly as we expected. And we could do more complicated expressions. I truly don't think it's a good practice to get too nuts with ands and ors because it gets to be very hard to read if you have more than maybe 3 conditions here. I'll show you what that means. So we're going to say if, let's do, if num1 is greater than num2, we're actually going to wrap these in parentheses. And num1 is equal to num3. Then we could do a or name is equal to, let's see what happens if we try to see it right there. It's not going to let us. I just want to see if we try to compare a string to an integer. It's not going to let us do that. If name is equal to name2. All right. Should be able to, let's run that. Yeah, and so that was still true. We had a more complex one, but both this evaluated a true and that evaluated a true. But what if we made all of these, number 1 is less than, so this is now going to evaluate to false, but that one is still going to evaluate to true. So maybe take a second, read that over, see what you think we're going to get. We run that, and you see we still hit our first condition because that side was true. If we change that to an and, now again, everything has to be true, all the conditions. We went down into our second condition. So another thing we can do with debug statements is, because a lot of times we may have more than a couple else if. Run that. Then we're going to add our else. All right. And we're going to just do system debug. Condition else if. condition else. So we're just going to see that in the log. So we're going to say now, if this first thing doesn't evaluate to true, we're going to evaluate our else if. And we're going to say, just so we can see how we could have multiple code blocks that we would evaluate with our expressions. If num3 is not equal to num2, then we're going to go into that condition. So that one ran into our else if condition, because this evaluated a false, that evaluated a true, and this never ran because it was an if statement, and that block of code never ran because this was where we evaluated a true and we ran this piece of code. The other thing I want you to see is ways you may use, so I'm going to just create a collection real quick, a list of strings, call it our name list. I'm going to say equals a new list of strings. In our constructor up here, I'm just going to give it the values in my variables of name 1 and 2. So we also use the exclamation mark a lot in code where we want to see if a method that returns true or false, or if we want to negate. So a classic one we use a lot is if a collection is empty. So our name list, right, is a collection. And if you remember our video on collections, we talked about how they have built-in methods. One of those on the list type is empty. So right now, name list is empty. I'm going to go, just going to say first, and then else, curly braces, system debug. I'm just going to say second condition. So if this is empty, we're going to say, hey, go into the first condition. And otherwise, go into our second. And that went into the second. Now, the reason I picked is empty. So a lot of times you're going to do programming where you're going to query the database for a list of values. And then you'll process the value, the contents of that collection. But if it's empty, right, then you just want to skip through. You don't want to do all this processing if there's nothing in that list, if nothing was returned. So if we said added let's go back up to the right spot in our code. Probably switch them from Mac to PC, and that goofs up my shortcuts sometimes, my hotkeys on my editor. So if name list. So now if we added, because we negated it. So before it was something like, if it was empty, do this first thing. Now we're saying if it's not empty, go in. So now we should actually enter into this first condition. First condition. All right, so I think that's a pretty good short introduction. I think we'll call it a day right there. So that is how we evaluate expressions, how we use if, else if in our Apex programming, and some of the basic operators to do equality, inequality, greater than, less than. So hope you learned something. I hope this was helpful, and please take a second and hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.